Hello, my friend. Welcome in. Welcome in. I'd like to invite you to join my sewing circle today. Everyone is welcome at my sewing circle. Perhaps you will be stitching or knitting, sewing, or perhaps you might be painting or some other craft. Maybe even you will be simply resting. There are no requirements, no abilities, nothing that you have to do to be welcomed here. This sewing circle is for you if you'd like to join me. I hope that this can be a place of rest and a place of relaxation for anyone joining me today, whatever that might look like to you. I also hope that this sewing circle, like so many crafting spaces I have been lucky to be a part of, can become a place of community for you and for myself. A community in the sense that though we may not be a part of each other's lives in a direct, daily way, this can be a space where you are welcome, a space where you are embraced, with no other expectations. I simply wish that at the end of our time together today, you feel rested and rejuvenated. Whether it's because you enjoy the idea of crafting with someone, this is something I have often found myself longing for, or perhaps you simply find the sounds commonly associated with sewing and fabric, needle, and thread to be pleasant and calming. Maybe even you like the presence of ambient background chatter, which as my family's resident chatterbox, I am hopefully able to fulfill for you. As we get started today, let me tell you all about the project. I'm currently working on a circle skirt that happens to be a very fun and whimsical mushroom leafy print. The print's colors are mostly blue base with light blue as the background, and then there are elements of green, brown, black, even some coppery oranges, as well as cream. These elements you'll see a little bit clearer later, since right now we're just looking at the back of the fabric. I work with young children, so I really find clothing with fun prints to be a great way to engage with my class. Skirts like this, with lots of colors and patterns and fun elements, are so great because they entertain not just the children I work with, but the adults as well. Another benefit of these more novel prints is that I can use them as a teaching tool. I might use the print to introduce new words or colors to my students, especially those that might feel a little shy or nervous around me, and they can hopefully come up to me and touch the element on the skirt I want to ask them about or teach them about. And this way they can be more engaged with their actual learning. The reason I'm working on this skirt today is because as the season shifted from the warm, hot, humid summers where I live to fall and then winter, I started switching out my light summer clothes for my warmer winter clothes. In winter, I like to wear lots of layers. Fleece-lined leggings, really high socks, those wonderful wool socks, and layers of shirts and sweaters, dresses, anything to bundle myself up because I'm a little bit thin-blooded is what my family used to say. But I get cold very easily, so I love layers and wrapping myself up in them. But as the season shifted and I started switching out my closet, I thought I would take the opportunity to go through and pull out some pieces which I had noticed were no longer fitting me the way I was either used to or the way I wanted. Most of these were skirts, and most of them were skirts that I had had for 8 to 10 years. And I was pleasantly surprised at how well they had held up. But they were just becoming too tight around my waist, which is a thing that I think inevitably happens to us all as we age. Even though we might love these clothes, they just stop fitting the way we want and are no longer comfortable to wear. And I don't really like keeping clothes that are no longer comfortable. So I packed them up and donated them to a secondhand shop in my neighborhood where I often shop for clothes when I'm looking for new garments to add. However, suddenly I found myself with a substantial hole in my skirt wardrobe, and I wear skirts almost every day. I like to live my life, and I'm very comfortable in the summer and in the winter, and so suddenly missing these kind of staple pieces in my wardrobe was rather surprising. I realized that I do rely quite a bit on these clothes. And instead of buying replacement skirts that fit me better, I thought I could take this opportunity to make some for myself and make them exactly how I wanted. This is one of the joys of sewing your own clothes, I think. I think most people who sew would find that true as well. When you sew your own clothes, you can customize the way everything fits. I can customize the fabric and the weight and the pattern, as well as closures and how it fits around my body. I can customize the fullness and anything else I like. And then most importantly, I can ensure the quality. And I can ensure that if something is not well done, that's on me. And that's really important to me. And this skirt is actually a test run for a skirt I'm hoping to make later this year. But that skirt would be out of the world. However, as anyone who's ever shopped for wool knows, it can be a bit more expensive than a cotton print. And this particular print I'm cutting out now, I actually found on sale for less than $3 a year, which is a very, very good price, and I was very pleased with. So on top of it being a delightful print that I love, it's also a great way to test out this idea I have about my skirt without cutting my more expensive wool and perhaps risking an idea that doesn't work out at all. Unfortunately, although I have made both a half circle and circle skirts before quite successfully, when I drafted this 3/4 circle skirt, I simply did not double check what total waist measurement was adding up to after I had drafted my original pattern piece and cut and sewn several two of the 3 panels together. After I'd done this, I realized I was missing about 9 centimeters in the waist, which was more than I could fudge even with my generous allowances. I debated adding in a straight panel to make up for the lost width, but I was really worried it would affect the drape of the skirt, and so I decided simply to add in a 4th panel of the same measurement and give myself a little extra gathering to play with in the back. So that's what I did. I cut out this extra panel, and now that I've moved to a slightly more comfortable location, I'm going to work on fixing what went wrong before. The first thing I need to do is to remove the waistband off of the back piece of the skirt. This will be done by using a sharp tool called a seam ripper. And we're going to, well, rip the stitches out without damaging the fabric. One of the things I like to do when I'm sewing, not on the table, is to prop my garment up so that I have a little better angle to work on things. And that's what this pillow you see is for. So now I've got the seam ripper out, and stitching, which is the type of sewing that I do, is a little bit more fiddly to rip out than, say, machine sewing is. Now, machine sewing is great, and I would absolutely use it for something like putting on a waistband, but I don't own a sewing machine. I don't have space for one, and there's a whole plethora of reasons. But hand sewing is a little more complicated to rip out. It just takes a little more patience and time. But once I get going, I find it to be a very calming task. It's very simple, repetitive, and honestly can be quite satisfying. Until, of course, I remember that I will have to sew everything back up again. One of the funny things about this skirt is that I had cut the waistband pieces to the correct size, but I did not double check the waist measurement of the skirt pieces before I cut them out. And you'd have thought that knowing the waistband measurement was the exact size I wanted the waist to finish at, and my skirt pieces absolutely did not end up where they were supposed to, should have told me that something had gone wrong before I sewed them on. Should have told me that something had gone wrong before I sewed them on. But I just thought, oh, it would work out somehow. There's no way my math could be that wrong. But it was. And mistakes are how we learn. And even more lucky, this is a very minor mistake in both life and sewing. And I had the solution already on hand because I had plenty of fabric to work with. I had in fact bought this fabric for another bigger project, but decided it would be great for this instead and fulfill this need of whimsical cotton skirt that I had in my wardrobe. And because I had bought enough fabric for a dress instead of a skirt, I had a whole extra meter on hand, which I then used to cut out the panel you saw before. Right now, as I'm pulling the stitches out, you might have noticed that towards the edges I was doing it more often, whereas in the middle I might rip one out and then pull the dress apart. This is because on the ends of my waistband I used a stitch called a back stitch. This is a very strong, very secure stitch, and sometimes I'll use it on the whole waistband so it can be extra durable if perhaps I'm making a very heavy skirt and I want lots of strength in the waistband. But this time I had opted to just backstitch the edges and then use a stitch called the running back stitch on the rest. Both work well, and the running back stitch is both much faster to sew and much faster to take out. Both, however, are much faster to undo than sewing it originally was. But a stitch, like the back stitch, is really important for the running back stitch. A secure, strong stitch is very important for the waistband of a skirt, or for trousers, or a dress if you have a waistband holding up the skirt, because that's a seam under a lot of tension. There's a lot we're demanding of that seam that we may not demand of, say, the side seam of a skirt, which is under very little tension, so you can use much faster stitching methods on that. But as I get closer to the middle of this, see how I was able to pull a big in fact, I think I'm almost done taking this off, which was so much faster than it is to put it on. But once this is taken off, I can then get to the next part of the project. Maybe perhaps not more exciting, but exciting for me to get one step closer to finishing. You might be able to see some of the colors of the fabric now a little better. The light leafy greens and sort of coppery bright oranges and really autumnal marigold yellows. They're great. And I don't normally see them paired with blue like this. I was really excited to get to pull this out. I can just imagine my students oohing and awing and tugging on my skirt to see different things better, excited about the mushrooms or the leaves, and I'll ask them, okay, what color is this leaf? What color is this mushroom? It's a lot of fun. Having a skirt like this that I can bring into classrooms with me and use as a tool. I've had many different skirts that are like that. One of those skirts was a beautiful navy shiny material that had these great red flowers and jumping bunnies. And I thought it was so cute. I had a big yellow skirt with great florals on it, full of purples and greens and reds and blues. You can tell that I really like those skirts, and I was very sad to see them go. But now that I've pulled out all the extra threads and getting ready to move on to the next portion, first things first, pack up the seam ripper. No more of the threads found. But now we're moving on to the next point. Picking up our area so we have a clean space to work on to start. As you can see, I have two of my skirt panels pinned right sides together. The first step in the hand sewing process is to thread your needle, making sure your thread isn't too long. I like to measure using my arm, so I go from the tips of my fingers all the way up to my elbow. If it's too much longer than that, I find it can tangle you easily, and it wears out and weakens as you pull it through the fabric, so you just don't have as much strength in your thread once you get to the end. But I also don't want it to be too much shorter
as then I have to stop and start my sewing too often to rethread, and that can be frustrating. I will often use wax on uncoated thread to protect it from wearing out too quickly, but this thread is actually a coated cotton thread normally used for hand quilting, and so it doesn't need to be wax as the manufacturer has already coated it, hence the name coated cotton. This isn't thread I would normally sew with when making an unlined cotton skirt such as this, as it's a little thicker than my preference, since it is made specifically for hand quilting. But in this case, the thread was the perfect color, and it's made of cotton, and I like to use the same fibers in my thread as in my material. So a cotton skirt, I want cotton thread preferably, and best of all, it's something I already had on hand in my sewing stash. As a rule, I generally try not to buy new materials for a project if I already have something in my house that will work well. Even if it's not my preferred material for that task, I still try to minimize how much I'm buying new, not just for environmental reasons, but also to minimize the amount of space it will take. You may think that thread doesn't take up much space, but the 3 boxes of it piled in my sewing corner tell me I have more than enough already, and that's not even counting embroidery thread. Now I'm going to be working on sewing the side seams of these 2 skirt panels together. While I'm doing this, I thought I would explain a little bit about some of the really basic stitches I've used in this sewing project and what their pros versus cons are, why you use one and not the other. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I thought this would be a good time to really lay out these 3 very basic stitches and why I use one and not the other, or why I pick one for one task and not the other. Generally speaking, you really only need to know 3 or 4 stitches to hand sew almost any garment, honestly. In fact, you really only need to know how to backstitch, and you can pretty much sew anything. But in this case, there's backstitch, which is a very secure stitch made by doubling back on itself about the halfway point for every stitch, and it's a very strong stitch. And then you have something called a running stitch, which is a very simple, very fast stitch done by running your needle up and down, up and down, up and down through the fabric without any back stitching. This is very fast, but is not very strong. So it's oddly enough culturally used in different ways. There's some places where historically the fabric was so valuable that they actually sewed their garments with running stitches exclusively, so that if a tear was to happen, it would happen on the seam line and not on the fabric itself, because the fabric was so valuable that it was better to have a garment fall apart on you than it was to have the fabric be destroyed by a tear. But now I've gotten off topic, But anyway, there's the stitch I'm using right now is something called a running back stitch, which you can probably imagine is a sort of happy medium between the sturdiness of a back stitch versus the speed of the running stitch. And it's done by taking anywhere from 2 to 5 running stitches, and then back stitching that last stitch, 2 to 5 more running stitches, back stitching that last stitch. So you cover more ground between back stitches, but you still have the security of a back stitch, although it's not as secure as if I had back stitched the whole line of stitching. This is not a seam though, which is going to have to contend with a great deal of strain or tension or stress, which is when you really value the strength of a back stitch. A back stitch you want on waistbands or on arms, like when you're sewing sleeves into arm size, a back stitch is really great because that's an area of your clothing which has a lot of pressure. In this case, even a running stitch would have been fine, and it's much faster. But I personally like using the running back stitch since it combines both speed and strength. This type of sewing is really some of my favorite kind. It's so basic, and you simply match up the straight edges, pin securely, and then off you go with needle and thread. Of course, there's a lot more to hand sewing than that. There's a lot more skill that develops as you do it more and as you learn, but really it is a very simple place and to start learning how to sew. And as you can see, I just finished this thread, and now I have to thread a new one, a new needle, and hopefully I won't have to thread anymore before I get to the end of the skirt panel. Because, threading the needle does take time, does take energy. It's kind of feels frustrating when you've been sewing all day to have to constantly rethread. And if you're wondering, the thing I'm doing here is making something called a quilter's knot. It has a few other names, but I've always learned it as the quilter's knot. And that just means there's a sturdy knot at the end of my thread, so I don't have to, tie other knots separately. But I usually do the quilter's knot and then back stitch over that tail to sort of keep it in place, and then stitch on my merino. But I think I was talking about how there's lots to learn in hand sewing. There's so many techniques you can use. Different cultures have different priorities in their sewing, like I said earlier. Things that they value more or less. If you learn about Victorian hand sewing, they really loved tiny, tiny, immaculate stitching, which is not how I like to sew. I'm not a tiny, immaculate stitcher. And I've really only been hand sewing for 4 or 5 years, but I can see a huge difference in the quality of my stitching, because although the actual skill is very simple to learn, there's so much you can improve on in your steadiness, in your stitch length, as you find which materials you like to work with. And buying high quality materials really does make it easier to stitch finely. Buying high quality needles and changing them often. I change mine for every project. Doesn't matter how big or small the project is. Just once that project's finished, on to a new one. And if it's a big project, I might change it in between. Using higher quality cotton or silk or whatever else, or high quality acrylic if that's what I need to sew with. I prefer to do that over using the really expensive stuff, because it does make a difference in your finished product. And although I don't make clothes to sell, I still want my clothes to look as nice as I can make them. And that's really something that's come both with practicing this skill and getting better at it. And now I'm faster than I was when I first started. But it also is about using the right supplies for the task at hand. Like so many people, when I start learning something new, I use inexpensive materials because I think I don't want to learn on expensive things. And I think that's smart, but now that I know, I absolutely would prefer to spend more money on my material, buying higher quality cotton when I can, or higher quality wool. I like the finished product much better. And thread is definitely one of those things you can spend a little more on without breaking the bank, which is nice. You can get higher quality thread for maybe double the price of the inexpensive thread, but that's still usually less than $5 in total. So this is one of those things where I think you can, if you're starting penciling, you should splurge on your thread if you can't splurge on anything else, because it will make a difference in how often you have to rethread a needle, or how often your thread breaks, or even how it wears and tears over time. But it's not so expensive that it sort of prohibits you from starting the task, starting the project. You can get inexpensive cotton and it won't wear as well as a nice Pima cotton would, but it'll still be a great learning tool. But something like thread, if you buy the cheapest thread possible, it will wear out really fast when you're using it, and it will tangle really easily. So it's worth it, I think, to buy a higher quality from the get-go once you start learning, and then make your choices from there. All that being said, now that I've rambled and rambled and rambled and rambled, I'm coming to the end of this line of sewing, and I will need to backstitch the last few, which I've done, and then I'm going to sew back the other direction just to make it extra secure, and that way, even if stitches tear at the end, it doesn't all come apart on me, which has never happened, but I like to think it's never happened because I take all this extra time to knot and backstitch and sew back, things like that. And of course, the hem on the skirt is still not finished, but that won't be done until that's usually the last thing I do. And I'll put in a small knot here. And none of these things are quite necessities because I do backstitch pretty frequently, but for me it's a better safe than sorry mentality. So, just gonna finish up with a few knots. As we come to the end of this video, I just want to say a few more things before I say goodbye. I hope that you found this video to be restful and relaxing, or perhaps you found it comforting while you did your own work. Whatever it is you're looking for, I hope you found it here, and you'll be joining me next time I post. I'm obviously very new to this, so if you have different recommendations or things I did that you liked, things I did that you didn't like, things you want more of, less of, please feel free to share them with me so that I can make more videos that you might enjoy. I wish you a lovely rest of your evening or day. A good night if you are luckily sleeping, if that was what you wanted. Honestly, I'll just say goodbye. Toodaloo.